Thanks, Saida. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for making it to the session. So in this quick presentation, what I would want to cover is what are the key focus areas, right? What VMware is working on, and how it can be of help in terms of redefining the current way how data centers are run, right? So to begin with, a quick snap of where we are as on today. So this is a little old report as on 2011, right, in terms of revenue and in terms of the stature. Some of the key names, key customers in the Indian territory, which have been listed, some of the big enterprise customers whom we have, who have adopted the journey with server virtualization, right, and all gone to a stage where they have matured themselves to deploy the other stack, to build their own internal private cloud. So this is one of the statements from Gartner, which talks about 81% of the installed virtual machines across the globe, which runs on VMware. We'll see why, right? Why is this confidence? Where does this confidence come from? To begin with, the key focus areas of VMware, right? Even though VMware today proudly ships close to 32 enterprise class products or technologies, right, to the customers, the key focus areas continues to be three. The bottom one being the infrastructure layer, right, where we talk about how efficiently can you run your or convert your existing data center from the traditional physical data center model where you run a 1:1 approach, one hardware, one OS, one application, into a virtual platform, right, and then manage it using different management products. Then comes the end user, right, wherein we are trying to come out of the traditional way how the end users are provisioned with physical desktops, where again it's a lockdown machine, one physical desktop, one OS, and set of applications which run on top of it. How does desktop virtualization help end user, which is centralizing the entire desktop provisioning and management within an enterprise, not just the desktops, but also the end user applications. How can we provision them centrally and manage it and provision it to the end users in a secure way? This was a layer. The third one was the application, cloud application platform layer, something which was recently introduced, probably 2 years back, where this is intended completely towards the developer community, right? People who have been used to developing their enterprise applications on Java language, who have been using the traditional frameworks like J2E and so on, how we can make a developer's life easier by introducing innovative frameworks like Spring, right, and then helping them run their applications on lightweight application platforms and make the applications cloud ready, or modernizing the applications. So what we will see more in this discussion is about transforming the existing infrastructure or the existing data center. So data center as an entity, most of you all would agree with me, is something which gets complex, right? It cannot get simplified. It just gets complex. The key reason is your need of more and more applications, deploying more and more servers, right? So tomorrow you have a need for an application. The process starts right from procuring a new physical server hardware, installing the operating system, installing the needful service packs, the applications, and all these things. So this is just about building the server. Now, how do we get the server entity hooked on to the rest of the infrastructure, like storage, like networking, like security? All these things have to be ensured. So the need of an application to deploy a new application just makes these kind of things much more complex. So the data center never gets simplified. It just gets more and more complex. So as a first step, right, towards simplifying the data center is where server virtualization comes into place. So where do you adopt server virtualization? There are two reasons, right? So one is when you look into your current data centers, right, where you have physical servers catering to each of your applications, end of the day, you see that the resource utilization on these servers hardly crosses a line of 25% if you take an average of CPU, memory, network, and storage, right? So that is the first step where first place where virtualization comes into existence, wherein we deploy a virtualization layer, right? And instead of having one OS and one app, we let you run multiple virtual machines, right? So this is the platform. Now, what is a virtual machine? Is it just another entity what you create? No. What you would want to look forward to do is to deploy your business applications. How confidently can you deploy your business applications on this virtualization layer? That is where VMware has succeeded, right? As on today, where, as you saw, more than 81% of the virtual machines running. And VMware is the platform which has brought in that confidence to the customers to deploy the business critical applications. Now, what we are seeing as a trend, right, among our customers is they're looking forward to virtualize rest of their 50% workloads rather than starting the journey with virtualization. They've already done that a couple of years back. Now they're trying to bring more rest of the workloads onto the virtualization environment, and then thus help them transform the current infrastructure into a cloud-ready one. So virtualization becomes the step one towards adopting a private cloud or moving into a public cloud. Right. So this is about the vSphere, right? So vSphere is the core server virtualization platform what VMware brings to its customers, which is now capable of taking any workload, right? So when I say any workload, any x86-based workload, right, which is something which can be virtualized. So if you talk in terms of resources, if it is CPU, or if it is memory, or if it is network, or if it is storage, ensuring that all these entities are efficiently virtualized and then provisioned to the applications based on the demand so that they don't see any difference between running an application on a physical environment or a virtual environment. Right? So that is where we have the wide range of application support. Now, this is a survey which was done somewhere in Jan 2010, right, where we saw some amount of confidence coming in from our customers where vSphere 4.1 was released at that point of time in the market. And when we moved on to June 2011, this is the increase in the number of people, right, who actually deployed the other workloads, the business critical workloads, some of the standard applications which are listed over there like SharePoint, Exchange, Oracle, SQL, and so on. Right, so just to move on, when we say vSphere, the server virtualization platform from VMware, this is the platform which, as on today, has the maximum operating systems, guest operating systems supported as virtual machine, right? Any x86-based operating system, right, which is either 32-bit or 64-bit, right, which doesn't have a custom hardware dependency, any operating system and any such application can be virtualized. When we talk about Windows, right from Windows 3.x all the way to the latest version of Windows, as you see, this is something which is introduced recently with the current version of vSphere, which is vSphere 5.1, support for Windows 8, both desktop and server operating system. And as in how the processor vendors like AMD and Intel scale up their architecture, what we also scale our virtual platform layer accordingly, right? So that we can extend the support to such applications and such operating systems. Right, so again, one more key feature, which we call it as vMotion, right, which has been there with vSphere or the platform since last 9 years now, which helps you to live migrate running workloads or running virtual machines from one server to the other. If one server, which is hosting, say, a couple of virtual machines, has to be brought down to maintenance or has to be restarted, you don't really have to bring down those virtual machines or your applications. You can live migrate those running virtual machines, preserving all those transactions to the neighboring host, right? But this had a prerequisite. We need to have a shared storage for that, right? So now with this current release, we are taking away that requirement. Without having a shared storage, you can live migrate a running virtual machine or a running workload from one server to the other. What it does is it will do two operations simultaneously. One is live migrating the virtual machine from host to host and live migrating the disks or the disks of the virtual machine from one storage to the other, right? So this is one new feature which has been introduced. Coming on to the backup, so along with the platform, we provide an efficient way to back up the virtual machines. Traditionally, what used to happen is the backup software vendors, the enterprise class backup software vendors, may it be Symantec, may it be EMC or IBM, or any of these backup software vendors didn't have visibility into VMware's file system, even though the VMFS file system, which is VMware's proprietary file system, was something which was used to host these virtual machines, which could be Windows or Linux or any other operating system. In order to traverse through the file system, it was not possible for these vendors. Now we have provided them the integration mechanisms. All you'll have to do is to go back to your enterprise backup software vendor and ask for a VMware integrated version. While we say that, VMware also provides an inbuilt backup solution, right, which is actually an inheritance from our parent company EMC's backup software, Avamar, which is now called as Vsphere Data Protection, right, available in 3 different dimensions. One is 500 GB, one is 1 terabyte, and one is 2 terabyte. Without having agents installed on any of the virtual machines, without investing on any additional backup server, or without having a dedicated tape device or a tape backup. This is a pure disk-based backup solution which is provided by default without any additional licenses by default along with the virtualization platform vSphere. Right. So what we are moving ahead, right? So that those were some of the key features. What we are moving ahead, right, in terms of our approach is, currently we say that the time difference between provisioning a physical machine and a virtual machine, right? So we hear figures like weeks, several weeks in order to provision a physical server with your necessary application versus few minutes in terms of provisioning a virtual machine. Because provisioning a virtual machine is what? You'll have a template already pre-created. You just right-click on the template and clone an additional image from that. But that is not it. As I said, when you provision a virtual machine, which becomes your application, how do you get that virtual machine entity hooked onto the rest of the components within your infrastructure? You'll have your security stack. You'll have your networking stack, right? You'll have your storage stack. Instantly, can that virtual machine, once it is deployed, get hooked onto all these layers? That is where VMware introduced something called as the vCloud suite, right? Even though vSphere, as you all saw, is the server virtualization platform, right? We provide other solutions, which is basically to manage and monitor the infrastructure, getting better insight into what exactly is happening at the CPU level, what exactly is happening at the memory level, and all those things. At the same time, we provided a DR solution also along with this, along with virtualization. Now, all those things are separate components, separate bundles. Everything is licensed separately. Everything is bought separately. So, based on this feedback which we got from our customers, is where currently, VMware decided to come up with something called as vCloud suite, which comprises of the platform, of course, which is vSphere. Along with that, there are other components, which is the vCloud networking and security, right? Another layer, which is basically to scale up the current way of doing networking and extending the networking from a physical environment to the virtual environment. Then there is software-defined storage and availability. How efficiently can we map storages? Because unlike traditionally how we used to depend only on the shared storage boxes, the SAN boxes, how can we make best use out of the local SSD drives, for example, right? And have an environment of, say, 32 to 64 virtualized hosts, right, running on local disks and then part of the same availability cluster. And then bring in an abstraction layer on top of this virtual environment, which basically helps you to have the first level of private cloud, providing a self-service portal, wherein for an end user tomorrow to provision a machine, right, it should be as simple as going into a web page, keying in his credentials, and he gets his operating system and he gets his virtual machine self-provisioned to himself based on his entitlement and the security. Along with that, we have other components like the vCenter operations. We'll quickly see what that is. And there is vFabric Application Director. So this is basically a new component which has been added for dynamic provision of applications, right? For a person who wants to deploy an application right from the scratch, which is installing a virtual machine, installing an operating system, installing the application, and getting it hooked onto the other components, like if it's a combination of a web server, there is a DB server, and an app server. How can we automate this process? When we have the operating system, ISO, all those things ready, we just automate the whole task, and it provisions or deploys the applications on the fly. That's where the vFabric Application Director comes into place, and extending our technology to the outside world. Right? If somebody else wants to integrate, right, the APIs are well exposed, both at the vCloud level. So the vCloud APIs are something which are used by our, our proud service providers, right, across the world to integrate our solution with their stack. And then there is vCloud Connector, where customers who have deployed some amount of workloads within their secure private cloud and then offloaded some of their less critical workloads onto a public service provider Still, how can they establish a secure connectivity between these two entities? Followed by orchestrator, which is right from creating a virtual machine, right from creating a snapshot for a virtual machine, right from provisioning a virtual machine from a template, all those tasks which pertains to the infrastructure, what you do on a virtual machine, can be automated using simple scripts. So that is where vCenter Orchestrator comes into place. Sorry. Right, and then we have the site recovery manager under software-defined storage and availability, which is the DR automation, right? So DR as an approach becomes much simplified, especially when you are on virtualization, because replicating a virtual machine versus replicating a complete physical machine is much simpler, right, in terms of thinking. So we'll see what that solution is. So this is another one key component which was introduced like a year ago, which is called as operations management. We used to get this feedback from customers saying that virtualization, everything is good, but but one of the biggest challenges what they face is troubleshooting performance issues, right, on a virtual environment. Because virtual environment, end of the day, it's a shared resource environment, right, where we have a big fat server, we have resources like CPU, memory, network storage, all virtualized, rather sliced, and then provisioned to the virtual machines. The moment you see a bottleneck at any one of these layers, it becomes hard to narrow down and see where exactly is the bottleneck. So that is where operations management was introduced, not just to check the health, which is how is the virtual environment doing as of now, right? Are there any risks? It is something which needs to be immediately addressed, right? How is CPU behaving? Or who is the virtual machine who is consuming maximum number of disk IOPS? All those things. Having a visibility into the current infrastructure, one. Second thing is planning for doing a long-term planning, right? What we have seen when we go back to our existing customers is 90% of environments, we see that the resources are over-provisioned, which means that a virtual machine which could have run, or the application which is installed on that virtual machine with so many users, which could have easily run with 2 virtual CPUs and 4 GB of RAM, has been provisioned with 4 virtual CPUs and 8 GB of RAM. Right, just to be on the proactive side, or probably they just didn't want to take chances. But what is happening is this is actually causing a virtualization overhead and has got a performance impact. Right? So how can we do this correction in the existing virtual infrastructure? It cannot be done just by looking at the task manager. It cannot be done just by looking at that virtual machine. It has to be done based on a history, based on a utilization trend. Right? So that is where this solution, vCenter Operations, help customers deploy a virtual infrastructure and run it in an efficient way, right? So that you don't over-provision any resources, everything is neatly done. And so that is about the operations management. And talking about the DR, DR becomes much simplified on VMware with this technology called as Site Recovery Manager, wherein you have virtual machines on the primary site, you have a secondary site. Either you can have you can leverage the replication that happens between 2 similar storage arrays, or it can be between 2 different hosts. So we even support host-based replication, right? So what does Site Recovery Manager do? Build an automation on top of it whereby you can actually create a neat and nice recovery plan, right? Saying that, okay, these are the virtual machines which needs to be protected, or these are the applications that needs to be protected onto the secondary site. And when a DR happens, you just need to click a button called as failover, and then it will start bringing up, shutting down the virtual machines on the primary site and bringing it up on the secondary site based on the order that you specify. Along with that, it also helps you to frequently do a DR drill, testing your DR solution as frequently as you want, which is not possible with the traditional DR, because there you need to have a downtime, you need to break the existing production replication, and you need to isolate the primary and the secondary and then do the testing. Here with Site Recovery Manager, you can see check the reliability of your recovery plan as frequently as you want. Right, so those are some of the key benefits of Site Recovery Manager, letting you to have any choice of replication. You can either rely on the storage-based replication, or it even supports the native host-based replication, which is the hypervisor support or support from vSphere. Right, so this is a quick view of the self-service portal, where once we have all these solutions in place, once we have a stable virtual infrastructure created with vSphere, once we have the management stack which gives you a clear-cut visibility into your virtual infrastructure in terms of resources, in terms of capacity and everything, using components like vCenter Operations, is where we call that infrastructure to be matured enough to be deployed for a private cloud stack to be deployed on top of it, right? So that is where we have something called as vCloud Director, which, as you saw, is part of the vCloud suite, which helps you to build an automation or an abstraction layer on top of the existing virtual infrastructure and provide end users with a self-service portal. So IT is something which becomes self-consumable based on some security policies what the administration would set. Right? Quite compelling, especially for the test and dev environments where there is a rapid requirement of creating and deleting virtual machines, operating systems, maintaining certain states, snapshots, maintaining libraries of OS images and all those things. It's quite compelling. Right? Finally, coming on to the end-user computing. End-user computing approach from VMware, yes, I know it's quite obvious that the word desktop virtualization is what strikes your mind. But today, it is not just about desktop virtualization. So why did desktop virtualization come into existence is where you all saw compelling challenges in terms of provisioning and managing physical desktops, right, to the end users. When I say physical desktops, not just the hardware, but maintaining the operating system on it, catering to all the end users' needs, where we used to follow a lockdown or a device-centric approach. User A has a problem, it has to be the connection. Somebody has to connect to his particular machine and do the troubleshooting and fix the problem. If something has to be done on his neighbor's machine, the same process follows, right? That is where the desktop virtualization technology came into picture, wherein just like how vSphere helps you to virtualize your server class operating system, virtualize your desktop class operating systems like Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows Vista, convert them into virtual machines, run them centrally in the data center in a secure way, and then manage it in a centralized way. Right? And provision it to the end users using one single management interface. So that was desktop virtualization, right? Now, the desktop virtualization technology, what we had, even though we had challenges, say a few years back in terms of provisioning virtual desktops over the WAN, rendering graphic images, these were the challenges which we used to have some 2-3 years back. We have overcome those things now by introducing efficient protocols like PC over IP in terms of desktop rendering, plus applications. End-user applications is again a challenging area, which where all the end-user applications, like right from MS Office or Adobe or any standard browsers, any client-side applications, again needs to be natively installed on the end-user's machine and managed in the end-user's machine. So instead of doing that, virtualize these applications, convert them into simple EXEs, and store them in a centralized location. Then the question came, how do you provision these applications to the end user? We don't want to have a model wherein Microsoft Office is something which is licensed for, say, 10 users, and we are talking about converting them to EXEs. Yes, we don't have to install it, but what if the 11th user tries to connect? He still would be able to connect. The technology didn't have any visibility into the licensing or the security portion of it. That is where VMware introduced something called as Horizon, one single interface or one single connection broker which would cater to all your applications, right from the SaaS-based applications. SaaS-based applications are something which are provisioned by some external service provider. Somebody uses a browser, he'll connect to some URL, and then he'll key in his credentials and he gets the application. Internal Windows-based applications, right? And the virtualized applications which I just mentioned, the ones which have been converted into EXEs. Everything getting managed in a secure way, in a centralized way, having a proper metering technology around what is the application utilization, consumption, who is using what, maintaining the correct licensing hierarchy for every user who is entitled to use which application, everything from one single interface. So this enables end users who log into the virtual desktop or even to a physical desktop using technologies like Horizon to just open up a web URL and key in a portal's name, and all the applications will get listed as icons, right? Just like a catalog. Right? So that whichever applications he is entitled to use will all get listed on a web browser. He just clicks on that application and launches the application. So where are we heading to? This is what eventually an end user's portal would look like. So he connects from a device which is as simple as a thin client, because thin client doesn't have anything natively installed, or there isn't anything that you can natively install on a thin client device. He opens up a browser from there, and he'll get to see all the components, right from the desktop. So you can see on the top, you have the Windows 7 and Windows XP desktop, based on which desktop he's entitled to use. These are his virtual desktops, right? Below, you'll see all the applications which he is entitled to use, right? And on the right side, you see all the data, right? So giving importance to the desktop, the application, and the data, the OS application and the data. So data, we generally follow, how do we share, maintain and share data between people in a secure way in any organization using technologies like Dropbox, which you would be familiar with. So same replacement for Dropbox, which has been introduced into the VMware stack, right? We'll have the official release announced probably next month, is where we can also have data provisioned as a service, right? So OS, application, and data. So this is the complete stack. I've not gone in detail into the application platform or any other. So what would be the steps? How are the steps to evaluate, right? Now, how you can virtualize your existing server environment is where we can come down and help you in terms of evaluating the utilization in your existing data center. If you have a farm of physical servers, what could be the consolidation ratio and how would be the architecture look like? Second thing is when we confidently say that any application you can virtualize, you saw some big names like SQL, Oracle, SAP, and all those things being mentioned. It is not that it's just about creating a virtual machine and then running this application on top of it. No, there are certain implementation best practices to be followed, right? So we'll help you in following those implementation best practices so that you get the net native performance, how you would see on a physical environment. You don't see any difference between a virtual machine and a physical machine. So that is all what I had in the short duration I thought of covering. Any questions?